Hey everyone, welcome to a new episode of the AI Best Business Show. Today I have with me Zuhair Haidar. He's a founder and an agency owner. We'll go through that during our episode. And I'll let Zuhair introduce himself. Zuhair, welcome to the pod.
Thanks, Ahmed. It's nice to meet you, and thanks for getting in touch. So very quickly, I am founder of many different entities. I am currently building a restaurant tech company called Jalebi.io with my two co-founders. And before this, I started a digital agency, which is still running, called Digital Street. I had a food aggregator website, which I launched in 2006, and that was a catastrophic failure that took 15 years to burn. I've had a 15-year corporate career working with some of the most insignificant and some of the most significant companies in the world, from British Council to Jalebi Group to acumen. So it's been a very interesting journey, but everything has helped me get to where I am.
I love that. And this is one of the questions I had looking at your profile and doing some research about you. I noticed you went from acumen, microdrip, foona, digital street, and now Jalebi. Is it Jalebi? This is how you pronounce it? Jalebi. You went through all these different experiences. I wanted to know, how did you get into each? Briefly, how did you get into each? And what main lesson did you take out of each one of each part of your journey? As briefly as you could.
Yeah, I'll be brief. Okay. Time me. I'll try and do it in 5 minutes. So I did my undergrad from a school in the US called Bucknell. I graduated in 2004. I came back to Pakistan, which is where I'm from originally, in 2005, just January. I got a job with Nortel Networks. I spent about a year with them. There was an earthquake in Pakistan. I took a sabbatical, tried to do some relief work in the northern areas, which led me to my job with the NGO, where I worked for about, 6 months. That led me to my job with Acumen, where the CEO was traveling to Pakistan at the time, and we met, and she offered me a job to come and build a drip irrigation company in a very remote part of Pakistan in the southeast called Tharbarkar. Spent about 2 years there, left Karachi, then I moved back to Islamabad. I worked with a small fintech company for a short time. It's not on my profile because I'm not very proud of that experience. Then I joined Jalebi Group, launched an internet company with them in 2008. Spent about 5.5 years with the group. They moved me to Doha. I was there for about 6 years with the group overall. Then I got a job with the British Council in 2012. I joined them in 2013. That brought me to Dubai, and I've been in Dubai since. I started foona in 2005 in parallel to my career, so it was never meant to be something that I could pursue full time. At that time, there was no pathway to do that. In 2015, I started Digital Street as a way of creating revenue that would pay to build foona, because I have a hard time letting things go. Very stubborn like that. And then in 2020, when COVID hit, I finally realized that foona had no future, and that's when we conceived the idea of Jalebi with my co-founder Rizwan. And we've been building Jalebi ever since. I've been full-time with Jalebi since 2021 Feb, I think, and I'm now advisory role with the agency, and I'm focused on Jalebi.
I love the shift in your career, and one thing I want to highlight for any founder who's listening, sometimes, as you did with foona, it took you 15 years to realize that, it's not an idea that could be pursued, and founders should maybe realize that earlier, so they could move on to the next step. And you opened the door to for me to ask another question. You said you're running, you're managing Digital Street as a chairman, so you have more time to run Jalebi. As a founder,
not as chairman. Yeah, that's a fancy word. I'm more of an advisor. I advise on strategy, and I interact with some of the clients from time to time because they feel comfortable. But I really believe in empowering teams and giving them autonomy.
Okay.
So we have a CEO.
And my question would be here: how do you manage your time between both? How do you manage your focus as a founder or as someone who's running two startups? We see if people hear about Bolt here in the US, the founder is doing a couple of stuff. Brian is doing a couple of stuff, and some people ask how could he manage running one startup is sometimes hectic. How about running two? So how do you manage your time, your focus, and like where you're putting more energy on?
Did I mention I have a 3-year-old son? I've been married for 15 years, and I have a dog and 2 cats as well. So I'll reply to you with 2 responses. The first is in 2015, I had a meeting with Mutasar Sheikha, who was the CEO of Careem. At that time, he was not a very famous person in the way he is now. Actually, funny story, side note, I met him originally in 2014 at the Web Summit in Dublin. He was actually exhibiting Careem at a startup just next to where I was exhibiting foona at the Web Summit. That's also where I conceived the idea to sort of start the agency as well. So it's kind of interesting to see, how far he's gotten and how much we still have to do. I met with him. He was kind enough to meet me for coffee one day. Just pick his brains like any young entrepreneur does with someone who knows what they're doing, seemingly. And I wanted to get his feedback and, also see if he could help me or support me or guide me. It was a very short meeting. It was maybe 30 minutes. Really demonstrates his feedback to me as well. And, I told him I'm working on, this is early days, I told him I'm working on a mobile charging device that I want to get installed in taxis because people need to charge their cabs on the go, their phones on the go. I'm working with an uncle of mine who wants to set up an oil and gas consultancy in Dubai, which he's been running for 30 years in the States. I am working a full-time job at the British Council. I am building foona. I am running this agency, Digital Street, which I've just started a few months back. And he just said to me, he's like, you need to focus. As in, you need to cut out a lot of that stuff that you're doing because you're floundering. And the interesting thing about that was I agree. I think ADHD has something to do with it as well. I have a hard time focusing on any one thing and I need to keep busy. But I found that doesn't have to be a handicap. It doesn't have to be a poor quality. I think that if you play on your strengths, I understand what I'm good at and I understand what I'm not good at. And I know that the things that I'm not good at, I need to make sure I have really trustworthy people with me who can do those things that they're better at, right? I can provide guidance, I can provide supervision, I can provide support, I can fight really hard, but, specialisms are specialisms for a reason. And so I think what I've done really well is learned the art of delegating and bringing people that are very independent and very self-empowered and self-aware to support me, to buy into the vision. And I think that's really what helps run multiple activities at the same time. That and managing it. Just like with you as well, I gave you a link to book your time, for this call as well. If it's not in my calendar, it doesn't happen. Even my time with my son is blocked off, so I don't have anything else that interferes with that.
This is amazing, and what you just said tells a lot. You have to be a 0 to 1 founder, and once you get to the 1, you have to change your strategy to be a 1 to 100 founder by delegating, by putting the right people in place. And you have to have this ability to give trust, because a lot of founders don't have this ability to give trust. And this is the difference between a 0 to 1 and a 1 to 100 founder.
Oh, thank you. I didn't know that, but I agree with that actually, because as founders and as people generally, we struggle with ego and pride, yes. And it's a big interference in our ability to actually become better than we are. Right? I have a few beliefs that I think are very important. Number one, I want to build a brand that lasts beyond my lifetime. And number two, I don't want it to be about me. I want to be the center of it for as long as I can, but I don't want it to be about me. I want it to be about the thing itself and how I can give myself to it and then bring other people to commit themselves to it as well. Certain type of people that contribute.
Let's jump into Digital Street. I think you answered one of my questions is why did you start it? You started to generate cash flow. You mentioned in it's a 2-question kind of. First of all, what is Digital Street? What do you do? And you mentioned on your, I think it was on your LinkedIn or in one of your podcasts that you started with $100 and you got to $2 million revenue in a year or two. How did you manage to do that?
So Digital Street is it's a digital agency. We don't like to use the word digital marketing. It's very commonplace. A lot of people use that terminology, so you kind of get lost in that ocean. So we call ourselves a boutique brand marketing agency or a boutique brand and digital agency. Essentially, it's a full-service content and communication team. They do everything from websites, social media, brand design. We don't do logos. That's the one thing we don't do. Performance marketing, websites, etc., etc. Services that are always in need and very easy to start selling. And if you do it well enough, you get the right kind of business. You can last long enough as well. We've survived as a company for quite a few years through a lot of different challenges, especially COVID. Almost wiped us out like many other companies. But the bounce back has been good and God has been kind, so I can't complain. Very good team of people. Started in Dubai, set up an office in Pakistan. Now most of the team is based out of Pakistan. And we have a new management in place as well. We're building out a new team, so we're adding some more people to it as well. To kick off the company, I basically I hosted a dinner in my hometown, Islamabad, and I invited a bunch of people together to give a presentation on, the concept and the idea of the company. And the idea was to basically package essential complementary services like building websites, managing social media, and creating a brand identity as a bundle and basically selling it. That's how we started. It didn't last like that because I think ultimately what you realize is that what you think going into the market is not necessarily what the market wants. But it got us started, which was important. And $100 went into organizing the dinner. That was the launch event. And out of the $100, we spent about maybe $20 on goodie bags. It's very cheap because we did in Pakistan back then. This is 2015. And we didn't earn the GMV was not over a couple of years. It was over about 5 years, much longer. Small team, very, very limited, sort of scope. It's not a ton of money, but I think in context, I mean, you're talking about like a few $100,000 a year of revenue as a side hustle while I'm a corporate, career professional. You're just trying to find the scrappiest and the most efficient way of building something without having to put a lot in. Service businesses are very difficult to grow as well because you've got very low margins of growth. You've got very high cost to run as an operation. 85-90% of the money goes back into paying salaries and office and things like that. So you don't really so it's very incremental growth. But the thing is that incremental growth does add up. It does compound. So if you stay in the game long enough, it builds your reputation, it builds credibility, builds a brand, and it also shows continuity, which is also very important because I think ultimately people trust things that last long.
Right. Okay. So with time, you build this trust, and this brings me to a question I had. You're working today with clients like New York University, Dubai, Silicon Osiris, and different clients. As an agency that's starting, how do you manage grabbing the trust of these big brands? You're an agency, you're not known. How do you manage to get the trust of these big brands to work with you?
I don't know. You'd have to ask them. It's hard to answer a question like that. I think it's just really, we really believed what we were selling.
Okay.
We really, try hard to make sure that we're reliable and we are willing to put in the time and the effort. We're not the best agency, I don't think, but I do think that, let me answer it in a different way. I think that participating in the collective ecosystem allows other people to see you long enough that they feel like whatever you're doing is something that they want, right? A lot of these organizations are introduced to us through relationships. They were not cold pitches or tenders that we applied for. And these relationships materialize into something because there's credibility coming with it.
No, I think, and the reason I asked because I know maybe someone from the people who listen to the podcast is interested in starting an agency, but they're like, okay, how do I get my first client? And a concept I've seen out on Twitter or LinkedIn from people who started agencies is go out and do free work at the beginning for a client or two. just to show that you could do the job and then
No,
get the
no.
bigger clients. Okay.
Sorry. No way. I'm actually vehemently against that. It's called Spec work. And Spec work, there's a great video somebody did on YouTube. I can share the link with you separately as well. The idea that your previous work doesn't represent your potential to do great future work
Right.
is preposterous, as in that it is not enough. That you should have to do custom work for free to demonstrate your ability to execute someone's work. That happens over the course of time. So you're giving them an advance on work that they haven't yet commissioned you for, and they're not going to pay you for it either, on the off chance that they might hire you to do that. Flip that around. Imagine if you ask them to pay you for work that you might do for them. Who needs who more? The challenge with the agency-client relationship is that it's always skewed in the direction of who has the power of purse. Right? So if the client needs the work done, it's assumed that you need the client more than they need you. That's not true. You need each other equally. The moment that entities start to recognize that importance and that balance in a relationship, that's when you start respecting people's expertise and craftsmanship. So to start the work, I think that it's okay to do subsidized work, or it's okay to do teasers of things that are part of a bigger thing. So for example, when you go to a dentist and they say, we'll charge you $100 for a consultation, but if you do any procedures with us, we'll adjust that $100 into the cost of the procedure.
That makes sense. Right.
That's fine, right? So there needs to be creative ways of doing something that demonstrates your ability to deliver and to be able to be a match, not at the expense of compromising your integrity and ideals as a service provider. So I don't agree with that.
I love the lesson we just took out of this. Amazing. A quick question before I jump into Jalebi. Out of Digital Street, you mentioned you were going to be wiped out. A lot of the times you spoke about cash flow problems. What is the main lesson that running Digital Street taught you about managing cash flow and money in general?
That's a great question. You don't need to be a finance expert to run an agency and still survive and be able to survive with just fumes. We actually fired our finance person because they were not doing the basics of their job to manage our cash flow in a way that would actually give us visibility and control our income, especially through COVID. My co-founder, who's also my wife, she basically took over that job, and she has no background in finance, no background in her mathematics are very basic at best. She's a great artist and a very, very talented leader. She put basic skills to use, and it brought us through the most sort of turbulent period that any service company could probably experience. So I think a very focused and very tenacious leadership, not overthinking, but prioritizing. So simple things like, for example, we knew we were going to get money erratically once every 3 months, right? So clients' cash was tight. So what we did was we told our team ahead of time. We never fired anybody. We didn't cut anybody's salary, and everyone got paid before eventually. We couldn't pay them on time, so you had to compromise on something. We told the team ahead of time. We told them that if anyone needs anything in emergency, we will try and contribute from our personal stuff, and then figure that out separately so we could help each other out. And everyone did. But when money would come in, we would prioritize it by giving the compensation to those people who needed it most. So, for example, if somebody had kids, rent, school, things like that, we would actually use that as a mechanism. So a single person with no kids living in home with their parents would be at the bottom of the pecking order simply because they didn't need it as much as somebody who has 2 kids, lives in a rented apartment, has to pay school fees.
I love that concept. If people know Gary Vee, he runs one of the biggest basically a media agency, and his number one skill is managing cash flow. I think that's what he's good at, knowing when the client's going to pay him and when is he going to distribute this money and where is he going to distribute it. And I think even in the startup world that applies, because when you receive funding, you don't want to burn through that funding. You want to prioritize and know where you're going to spend it and how long it's going to last you, what cycle is going to last you up until you're going to go out and raise your next funding round. And we're going to speak about that
Correct.
later on.
Awesome.
Before I got into Jalebi, you started something in the restaurant tech industry. What were the pain points in the market? What was the gap in the market that led you to start your new venture?
So at first, we thought we were solving for a compounding problem of orders were shifting from dine-in and take-out to delivery. And so what we saw immediately happen first was a shift in where the orders were being piped in from. So we thought first we'd build a interface that would actually unify all the aggregators into the POS of the restaurant so that the restaurant only has one device with multiple aggregators and their orders data coming into that one interface, right? We started with that thought. That was the initial strategy. And that we ran with that for about 6 months. We didn't build anything. We built a concept and a business plan around it. And we tried to apply for different programs and investment and things like that. But it didn't really materialize until about 6 months in, as we started to get more and more mature in our understanding of the industry, we realized that, and we also learned that there were a couple of other companies that had come in and started building or had built something like that. They already had traction, they had money already. So we realized that was going to be very difficult for us to, and we didn't want to be another startup. We didn't want to be a startup doing something for the sake of doing it. We didn't want to do it in an art space either. We wanted to really kind of find a real problem and solve it. It's always a problem to solve. You just need to look hard. So then we shifted our focus to becoming a menu management system where we would unify and digitize menus for restaurants in a way that they would have one single menu so that whether it's a QR menu, website, or an app, or an aggregator, the menu content was originated from one source. And then we got into Techstars, the accelerator. And when we got into Techstars, that's when we also realized that the menu platform that we were planning on building or we had started working on was not sexy. It wasn't going to scale. It wasn't something that people would line up around the block to buy like an app, like an iPhone. That was the feedback we got. So we went back to the drawing board and said, okay, what else is really, really problematic? And we realized through our questions and interactions with restaurant owners for many, many months leading up to that point, nobody ever said to us that inventory is a problem that they just really struggle with. And one of the reasons for that was because we never asked them. And the other thing was that they never thought it could actually be better than it was. And inventory sucks. Inventory management sucks. And when you ask people how they manage the inventory, they'll give you every possible answer. They'll never be like a consistent, this is how we do it. The only consistent response you get is people using Excel. Realized, hey, maybe what we need to do is read between the lines. And so that's what we started to do is look at things that people were not saying and try and cross-reference that with things that were really problematic. And what we realized was cost management, inventory control were two things that were actually very, very problematic because that's where the hemorrhaging happens. But that's also the most difficult part of managing business because it's unsexy, it's hard to do, and there isn't great sort of best-in-class technology that does it that's accessible by all. You have great technologies that are very expensive. Enterprise clients will use it, but average people don't. So that's how we ended up where we are. So we're basically a cost-focused.
To explain what your platform is or what Jalebi is, let's say I'm a restaurant and I'm coming up to work with you. I went on your website. I saw you do supply management, universal menu, smart inventory, intelligent intelligent recipes. Let's say I'm a restaurant owner. I'm coming up to work with you. Take me through the customer journey. How would I work with your platform? What would your platform benefit me as a restaurant?
Very easy. So the first thing is you need to be of the mind that you feel that there's room for you to improve what's called the food cost ratio. So food cost ratio is the single metric or North Star that we're trying to address. Is that your food cost ratio is too high and you have a hard time kind of bringing it down because of variables like theft, wastage, spoilage, over ordering, stock management, supplier challenges, like supply chain issues, things like that. A lot of things you can and cannot control. A lot of things you can and cannot see. What we're trying to do is bring all of that into one unified space so that you have visibility. Because having access to information is step one in obtaining absolute power. Step two is being able to action decisions based on the information that you have. Right? If you don't have information, you can't make decisions that are impactful. So what we do is first bring everything together in one place. But step one, when you're starting a relationship with us, is you will actually build out your inventory as your first step. Right? Now that's habit changing in a way that is not making them do something different from what they're used to doing. It's just different from the way that they're used to doing. What I mean by that is typically people will hire technology like Jalebi, but they'll focus on using it for a POS or a point of sale system, like an order management system. But they will not use it for inventory management. But they'll definitely not use it as an inventory management system, which will allow you to also transact. That's what we do differently. So essentially what we do is we ask people to first build their inventory according to a certain standard. We're following international standards that are unifying the way that inventory management is done. But we're trying to make it easy so that people can just build out a simple Excel sheet, create a template, drag and drop it onto a platform. Platform will build out their inventory. From there, they build out their menu, they build out their recipe, and then they can start monetizing those items by activating the point of sale system on our platform as well. So essentially, it's the same technology that everyone's used to having, except in reverse. So typically people will buy it because they want to use it for the point of sale. They'll buy our platform or access to it because they want to actually control their cost. So what we're trying to do is basically say that the problems that people think that they have is not the actual problem. Those are symptoms for the problem. The problem is actually managing the cost. The symptoms are complicated technology, too many different touch points, losses, theft, wastage. These are all symptoms. What we're trying to do is address those symptoms by saying we're trying to diagnose those symptoms by giving you visibility of those symptoms or of those towards those symptoms, and then helping you control how you optimize and cut off the
So
game.
basically, let's say the restaurant has a steak plate on their menu. You come in, you're like, okay, what goes into the inventory of creating the steak plate? Steak, spices, sides next to it. You put down this inventory, you take it, you put it in the system, that creates the menu and recipe for it. And they have the cost, they have everything, and this is how they start managing each and every item on their menu. Perfect.
Correct. Yeah. Exactly. But add to it also the oil that goes into cooking it, the kitchenware that goes into preparing it, the time it spends in the fridge, where it's stored, how long it's stored for, when it was ordered, expiry date, quantity that was ordered, how much of it was trimmed before it was actually cooked, how much it was thrown away after it was trimmed. So we're capturing every detail that typically would get ignored. Because then you also need to know
Here's the quick question. Are you only providing this data and letting them do the decision and the ordering, or is Jalebi helping them do the ordering from suppliers?
So we don't actually do the ordering from suppliers yet. What we want to do, so again, this is kind of going back to my original point about how we manage our time, trying to bring that into the platforms. We're focused on doing what we do really well, is we're building an operating system that controls everything from supply to demand, which is the order management, right? How we do that is basically we say, okay, we have to have a start and stop. We cannot just say that we're going to do everything. We have to be good at certain things, but we have to know when to partner with others who are good at certain things. So there are platforms that are aggregating marketplaces for suppliers, or they're aggregating suppliers directly. What we would do is through APIs, we would integrate it so we can actually have orders placed through our system via those platforms that will allow the merchant and the supplier to actually have a transactional relationship because of a marriage between our platform and a marketplace platform, right? The same way on the front of the house where aggregators would integrate into our platform or through an aggregator interface like DeliverAct or others like them, we would basically be able to pipe orders directly into the point of sale system. So essentially, we start where the supplier brings the material in, and we stop where the order is actually generated at the front of the house. Everything else outside of that is done by others that we would integrate into.
Another lesson, focus on what you do well, really good first, and then later on, if you grow more, you could expand to that. And I mean, there's a bunch of partners you could partner up with. that help you throughout the way. You don't have to do everything. There's room for everyone in the system.
And you shouldn't. And we're very partnership centric as well. We really believe that good partnerships can go a long way for everybody. I think, if we don't make it about us, we make it about the business or the entity or the customer that we're trying to give value to, then we've realized that we can actually do a much better job by, going back to the advice Mudassar gave me, is just focusing on what we need to do. And then, look at how we can leverage other expertise that other businesses have, that we can then expand our collective offer.
Here's a question I have. You're working with over 30 brands, 4 different markets: UAE, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Oman. Is that right?
Well, yes and no. So we started our journey.
Right.
We knocked on every door. Right. We talked to everyone we knew, all our friends, etc. But what we eventually gravitated towards, through the Techstars program, was that we need to focus on one market. So we're actually launching in Saudi Arabia as our first market now. It's actually currently in play. And we have 30 brands that we've collected over this time. So about more than half of them are actually in Saudi Arabia. Some of them are not. But essentially what we're trying to do is now we're basically focusing entirely on Saudi Arabia as our primary market. And then we'll expand into other markets as well. We have an office in Pakistan. That's where our engineering team sits. We have people in Saudi Arabia. We have a team in Oman. We're going to be launching in Oman next year as well. So we're doing already some groundwork there. And, we've got people all over because it's a hybrid.
2 questions here. First one is, I know integrating with the restaurants, because restaurants typically have their own POS. Everyone used to it. Everyone used to doing the system in that way they're doing. It's hard to come in and integrate with them. How are you tackling this problem? Because, and the reason I know I wanted to start a startup, that you could have an app on your phone, a QR code, you could get to the restaurant, scan the QR code, order through the QR code, and the food would come to you. But I tried starting and building the platform, but then I was having a huge problem going to restaurants and be like, okay, forget your POS. We're going to have a new POS for you. You're going to learn how to use it, start using it. That's going to save you money on the long run, but you have to integrate it first. And that was a major problem. How did you tackle this problem?
Again, no substitute for experience. You learn these things and you figure out. I am a big proponent of taking the path of least resistance, and I believe that that's the fundamental thing that works best with restaurants as well. See, most people get into the restaurant business because of an emotional driver. It's not a practical driver. They believe that they have a great recipe. They have a family business. They love bringing people together. They're not always great business people. It's fine. I wasn't a great business person. I had to learn, but my business required it. So with the restaurant as well, you have to learn that. But you learn it just enough for yourself, right? And just because I ran a great pizzeria doesn't mean I can run a really good burger shop, right? Maybe certain things are different. But I think the thing that with restaurants works is go to where they are. Don't make them learn to do something new. Meet them where they are, and then gradually, over time, use what they've already learned and then shift them over to what is better. So essentially what we're saying is that rather than forcing them to do something which they're going to be resistant to anyway, find a way to actually co-create with them or to do something that they're actually comfortable doing already, and then use that as the starting point and then work your way forward. Because when you're trying to teach someone to do something entirely new, they're going to resist it. Because the fear of actually spending time and learning something new when you've already got so much to do, it just feels like it's not going to be worth it. Nobody wants to engage in that kind of activity. So you want to try and adopt consumer-like behavior in a B2B scenario. And this is something that is actually, very few companies do this really well. You've got Slack that does it really well. Google does it really well. Introduce individual behavior that people have already been accustomed to, and then use that to gradually shift their behavior. Right? But if you force them to do something that's fundamentally different, like you go and say, no, don't do that, do this entirely different.
And this is what you said at the beginning. Right? They were using Excel sheets, so we came ahead and tried doing the inventory in the same way as doing an Excel sheet, but have it in a technology way.
Yeah, we call it Excel.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. I'm going to go back outside of Jalebi to the general picture. what are some challenges or pain points, because you're in the F&B sector, what are challenges or pain points you see in the GCC in general, in that sector, that you would tell to a startup, this is a pain point, this is a gap, go figure out and build something there?
In general, or in the industry?
In the industry in F&B.
I don't know, that's a tough one. I mean, there's a lot of pain points, but there's also a lot of people trying to solve a lot of those pain points. So I think the first thing is really kind of go and ask the customer what they're doing and try and understand why it might be done better a different way, by understanding what a different way looks like. You have to kind of understand the landscape, right? It's very easy to come in and tell people that they're doing something wrong before you really have an understanding of how they arrived at that. Maybe the wrong thing, what appears to be the wrong thing at face value, is the right thing. Is just that you haven't gone through the same journey as they have to understand, what the challenges are. So let me put it another way. I think that it's important to kind of understand your customer and your customer's needs at a very great level, but you don't want to spend so much time that you get so emotionally invested in what they're doing that you get sidetracked from what you're actually meant to be doing to help them. You don't want to enable a bad journey by adding more pathways to that, right? What you want to do is try and map out a better journey, but one that is actually going to complement what they're already doing in a way that also improves the way that they're doing it and also becomes enjoyable, right? Nobody wants to go to work because they're forced to go to work, right? They want to go to work because they enjoy it. They don't have to love it. They don't have to have a fun time every time, but they have to feel passionate enough that it makes them want to do better every time they go, right? So I think, even for a founder, when you're trying to go and do something that's meaningful, you have to first be prepared to kind of put a lot of conviction behind it, right? And to put conviction behind something means that you have to be vested in the idea that what you start doing may not be what you end up doing, right? You go through a journey, you go through a process of discovery and questions and answers that will tell you that, what you originally thought was a problem might not have been the problem. There was something else that was actually hidden underneath something. You have to go in with a very inquisitive mind. You have to be very open-minded, and you have to be very honest with yourself as well. But the most important thing, I think, is that you need to have a good team and a good partnership of people. For me, I think without my co-founder at that time, it wouldn't have been possible, right? So I think you need to be able to divide and conquer.
That's another question to have you answer my question better. If you weren't building Jalebi right now, what will you be building?
Jalebi. As I mentioned, I have a 3-year-old son, so I'd probably be continuing working with Digital Street, and I'd probably be focused on being a dad. But frankly speaking, I don't believe in regrets. I don't have any as such, and I think with that, I also feel like I'm not in a position where I would be doing anything different, because I'm doing what I'm doing because I'm meant to be doing this, right? I am where I need to be. And so I think this is...
Okay. Yeah, and the reason I asked the question is I tried to see what, you're building this now, but let's say, what are ideas you have in your head that be like, oh, that's a cool idea that I wish it existed. Oh, that's a cool startup idea that people should go and try building that.
Okay. Funny story. I think until we really figured out what we needed to do with Jalebi, even a year and a half into the journey, I used to think like that. I used to look at other things and be like, oh man, that's a cool thing.
Right.
But I feel like those are all distractions because you're not fulfilled by what you're actually focused on and meant to be doing. I can tell you with absolute confidence, I'm almost 43 years old. This is my third venture of my own. I've done a couple of ventures for other companies as well as an entrepreneur. This is the first time in my life that I'm entirely, completely... This is my universe, right? And I'm not blinded by it either. I'm not so emotionally involved in it that I can't disconnect from it. Be practical about it. But I'll give you an example. I was just thinking about this today. Almost exactly a year ago, we got our offer to get into Techstars. That's when we were invited into the program. At that point, we were I was the only full-time founder. My two co-founders were yet to become full-time, and we had one full-time employee. Today, we are 3 full-time co-founders.
Wow.
We have a team of 25 people.
Okay. That's
in
great.
6 markets.
I wanted to follow up. Right. I wanted to follow up on one question. You mentioned that you're just focusing on KSA right now. What's the reason you chose focusing on KSA and not, let's say, because I know Kuwait is a big food hub of the GCC region. Why did you choose KSA and not, like, let's say, Kuwait, UAE, or Qatar?
When you're an entrepreneur, you very rarely get this opportunity to come up with a product or an idea that is novel enough that it will solve a major problem for a global industry, but to be able to do it in the fastest growing F&B market of this half of the world. The only other market that actually beats Saudi Arabia in growth right now is the US. The Saudi market right now is valued at about $45 billion. The F&B, the food services market. Our addressable market is about $3 billion. We're targeting 1% of that $3 billion market right now over the next year, 2 years. The transformation that Saudi Arabia is going through right now is unprecedented. No country in the world is experiencing that. No country has a sovereign wealth fund that is more than $1 trillion that is being invested over the next 10 years to transform the economy to a non-oil-based economy. And to do it at this pace and this sort of passion, right? But I think the other thing is that, again, about the point of path of least resistance. Up till the point we got into Techstars, only one angel of ours who I'd known for a long time and almost, I think, felt bad for us and gave us a tiny bit of money to, keep us in the game, just mentally at least, if not financially. After Techstars, all of our investment essentially was driven by Saudi investors. And the market was ripe because there's maturity in the market. They're comfortable using technology for restaurants. So restaurant owners are familiar with this. They're mature enough. They're very advanced, by the way. They're comfortable paying monthly subscriptions for technology. So other players have actually warmed up and really matured the market. So it's like, think about it this way. There's this huge market. It's like literally landing on a gold mine.
Okay.
It's just between you, the gap between you and the gold mine is literally just a small wall.
Are you making money through subscription, or do you, once they have the POS, are you taking a like Stripe fee or like processing fee?
No.
Okay.
So we don't take processing fee. We match the processing fee that they would have had. We pass on that cost to the customer entirely. We don't take any money on that. We're not a fintech, not yet at least. But we have a very small subscription fee, it's very marginal subscription fee, but we actually have a different model that we're using, which is basically going to be tied to the optimization of their costs.
Okay.
So
okay.
they save.
And that makes a lot of sense to restaurants. I mean, save money, we'll save you 5%, we'll take 1% of that 5%. So my last question, because I know you vented this out on LinkedIn, and you're a mentor and advisor for startups or for founders, and you will speak about burning cash, hyper growth, and sustainability. What are your thoughts on that?
My dad always told me that if it's too good to be true, it probably is. And he also told me that if you don't respect money, money is not going to respect you. I think that the problem with hypergrowth is that it's primarily fueled by a strategy that is mainly investor-driven. That's not a bad thing. I'm just saying that it's very investor-driven, right? Because investors are looking at payback, right? It's a tricky game. They need to put money in and they need to see returns. And they need to see returns that are better than putting money into a capital market, right? It's better than putting money into bonds and stocks and ETFs and things like that, right? Because they also have investors who are investing in the fund. So founders become driven by where they're going to be able to raise money from and what raising that money would entail, right? Because then the investors are saying, how quickly will you get 4x, 10x, 20x growth? Because they need to look at returns between a year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever. It used to be a 7-year horizon, but that's obviously changed thanks to NFTs and crypto. But I think that the challenge with that is that See, when you're a founder, you have two very clear paths to take. You're either a value-driven founder or you're growth-focused, where you're sort of investor-driven founder, right? Value-driven means that you're trying to build something that is actually going to have value for its end user. You don't know if it's going to take 6 months or a year or 10 years to get there, right? With an investor, you have a very clear visibility that you need to be able to show returns on a certain time frame because those are KPIs that the investors put on, right? So the motivation for how you build your business is going to heavily drive what kind of business you're going to build. If somebody says to me that here's $100 million, I need to spend all of it in 2 years, or I won't give you follow-on funding,
2 years.
That reputation, I have to, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to raise more money. The problem with that thinking is that you end up thinking that I need that money in order for me to build the business. If you can build, you need some capitalization. We needed it. We couldn't have done this without capitalization, but you have to have capitalization for the right reasons. I need it because I need to build a core team, but I want to be revenue focused because I want to build a business and a product that people will buy so quickly that I don't need to rely on investor funding. Investor funding, in fact, becomes a catalyst. It fuels my growth. It doesn't drive my growth. So I think that burning cash and hyper growth, I don't disagree with them entirely. I just disagree with the way that they've been positioned. And I disagree with the way a lot of companies have employed those tactics because of the reasons why they're doing it. They're not doing it because hyper growth doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get your product, a better product to customers faster. It just means you're going to get a product out to people in volume that you can actually show multiples of growth, which will then generate a higher valuation.
Because
which you can
what's happening is
because you're giving up ownership of your company to
exactly
in exchange for cash, right? It's essentially what you're doing. If you're taking debt, that's a different thing. But if you're doing equity, that means you're basically giving up control of your company. So you're actually allowing somebody to take ownership of your company piece by piece by giving them the ability to dictate where the company goes.
And this is why I tried building startups. I failed both times I tried. But something I have in my mind is I want to delay raising money from investors as much as I can to have a product I have in place to get my product market fit, because money from VCs isn't going to get me product market fit. It's going to get me customers on the long run. It's going to fuel my growth to get more customers. But I have to have a product market fit in place where I proved my good product and then later on grab this this VC money to fuel that growth. I don't want to be fast where I got $100 million from VCs and then shut down my company and fire all my employees without even delivering a product to customers. So, and that founders should focus on building a product that's sustainable, that solves a solution and a pain point, and then get VC money to fuel their growth. And
so, it's, I don't want to sound hypocritical, but the thing is that I also feel like,
yeah, of course,
VCs need us. And at the same time, different kinds of businesses take different time to find PMF, right? Product market fit is not something that most people won't find it without actually getting some money in, right? You need a little bit of seed money or pre-seed money to be able to get you somewhere, right? But I think that I don't prescribe to an ideology where people should or should not do something. People need to do what they believe is right for them. Right? I think for some companies, they will go through the journey of like hiring very quickly and firing a lot of people.
Yes.
There are stories now where you have companies that have been acquired and at the same day fired 50% of their staff. So they made a ton of money. They've reduced the fat on their operating cost because they let go of a lot of people, but they also got acquired. So somebody made a lot of money on that, right? I believe that humanity has become very divided between what is the right thing to do, what is the wrong thing to do. I don't think that's really the argument we need to be making. I think the argument we need to be making is what do we believe in and what do we have conviction to be behind? And then do that rather than criticizing what others are doing right or wrong. Do the version that you believe in and use that as a way to kind of further yourself. And if that becomes a model of excellence, then so be it. The motivation, I don't think, should be because you're trying to be better than somebody else. The motivation should be that you're just trying to be the best version of yourself as a founder, as a company, whatever. Right? And then people who are drawn to that will gravitate towards you. You will create a universe and other people will come and orbit around you. And that's amazing because then you'll feed off of each other and you'll have a shared vision and you'll move together and wherever. That's how communities are built, right?
Right.
You first find an oasis and then you create communities around that oasis because you feed off the water, so on and so forth. Okay? But I think that the other thing is also that we need to be very clear about why we're doing what we're doing. Right? If we don't have a very clear why, my co-founder Rizwan keeps saying, there are 5 whys. You've got to ask yourself 5 whys. And each of those whys need another why until you finally get to the truth. And that truth is usually something that you wouldn't even think about because you really have to kind of dig deep. What you end up with is a truth or a reality that might not be that big. It might not be that grand because we've become so occupied with how to make something sexy and shiny and sellable that we lose the plot of like what's at the basic core level. And firing someone on Zoom, for example, is a really crappy thing to do. But when is it easy to fire anybody, right? So you just have to find the humanity in whatever you do and try to do that, right? Ryan, again, we talked about him earlier, Ryan Breslow. Yeah, people have opinions about him, and he's been very critical of players in the ecosystem as well, which I think is an extreme. But he really tries to use a humanity-centric kind of an approach, and I like that. I like certain things about what he does. I don't know if you like him entirely.
I think this is a great way to end. This lesson is a great way to end our podcast today. I think we covered a lot, and if you look at my question list, I have like 6-7 more questions to ask because I found a lot that I could ask, and you're doing great stuff. And how did you get into Techstars? A lot of really different stuff, and we could keep it for another pod in a year from now.
Sure.
Yes, and I really enjoyed our conversation. I think people who are going to listen are going to enjoy this conversation. Any plugins, any last words you want to put in?
No, man, I just want to appreciate you. And I think, you reaching out and taking the time to do this. And there's a lot of work that goes into this, taking an interest in people and helping create a story out of their story. I think it's really good. So thank you very much. And I really appreciate you for that. I saw some of your previous content as well. And I think, other people have also benefited.
Thank you,
as well. So thank you.